Good afternoon. It is a good afternoon. We're here, we're together. If we're watching this, we're alive. That's not a thing to take for granted. It's beautiful that we're together. Let us be thankful that we are together. Who's in the house? Where are you tuning in from? Sandy McMurray says Michigan here again. Iris from Las Vegas. Beautiful to see you. Let me check here. Okay, that's the YouTube. Very good. All right. We've got a slightly complicated page today, a slightly complicated daf, but it's going to yield some rich rewards. So, let us start by thanking our utility workers. If you're thankful to everybody who's keeping us with light, with water, with gas, with internet, with television, if you think that's important, hit the love button. Let us say thank you to all the utility workers who are working these days, keeping America in power, in water, in everything that we need. They are brave. They are on the front lines of this war against the virus, and we express our gratitude to all of them. Okay, so we're going to start with a quote from Shimon ben Elazar regarding one of the substances that we can use in the Shabbos lamp. We are holding on page 26 of Tractate Shabbos. We're in chapter 2 and still elaborating on the second Mishnah of chapter 2. We run into a quote from Shimon ben Elazar. And so I went and looked up Shimon ben Elazar in this beautiful volume that I highly recommend. So this was a late addition to the Art Scroll Talmud. I've often been teaching from the Koran Talmud. What I like about the Koran, it's a little bit simpler. It makes my teaching a little bit easier for you. And also because when there's an open question, the sages debate one way or another, and then we're wondering, well, where did they come out? What is the law? What are we supposed to do? The Koran always has that note in the margin telling us what the halacha is. The Art Scroll, however, has more commentary, more different commentators from more different times and places. Its translation is a little bit different. And whenever I have a question I don't quite understand, I like to look at both because really it's an incredible job that both Art Scroll and Koran did. They're just different. If you can possibly have access to both, it's the best. But Art Scroll added, although they finished publication of their Talmud, for the last cycle, they finished in 2012. Koran just finished here in 2020 or 2019. But Art Scroll just added this introduction, and it's great because it's got little blurbs on every single one of the sages, which is great if you want to learn a little bit more about them. So Shimon ben Elazar was a close disciple of Rabbi Meir. So we've had a few teachings of Rabbi Meir lately. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar was known for his wisdom. And when he asked how he had acquired his keen knowledge, Shimon ben Elazar attributed to the influence of Rabbi Meir, right? So one who is honored, one who honors others. And he was definitely quick to honor his colleague, Rabbi Meir. A few other of his teachings are given here, but a really lovely one that is really, it's valuable at all times, but especially in tough times, right? When we're in tough times. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar highlighted the value of experience that comes with age, declaring, if the youth say to build and the elders say to demolish, demolish and do not build. For the building that is done by youth is destructive, while the demolition done by elders is constructive. You have to really wrap your head around that, right? So he's saying that like the value of experience is so great, right? That if the young people are saying, let's build, it's time to build, right? Which always sounds like a good idea, let's build a new thing. But the elders are saying, actually, this is a time to demolish, to tear down, to make the way for something new later, but right now to demolish. Then we should follow the elders and demolish and do not build. because the building of the youth may end up being destructive, and the demolition advised by the elders will end up being constructive, right? And I think that's a great piece of advice to remember when we're in tough times and everyone is saying, I got the answer, I got the answer. You got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do that, right? And, everyone doesn't have the answer because they're all contradictory. People just want an answer. They're jumping to answers. It's not so clear what the right answer is. And people who have lived through lots of ups and downs have a valuable perspective. And I submit to you, my friends, in this youth-obsessed culture, we're always a little too quick to say, well, this guy's totally in touch with with high tech, and he understands the new this and the new that and the technology this and the algorithm that. And this old guy, he's totally out of touch because he's old, because he's not on the internet, because he's not, he's not with it. So the old guy must be wrong. The elders have been around for a long time. They may not have seen a global pandemic like we're living through now, but they've certainly seen markets go rise in a bullish way and markets crash in a bearish way. They've seen a lot of people get sick. They've seen a lot, right? So when the elders are skeptical and saying, don't be in such a hurry to jump to this or that answer, listen to the elders, listen to Shimon ben Elazar. And while I was in this volume that I went to look up a little bit of Shimon ben Elazar, it's a practice of the sages, and we'll actually run into it several times in our journey through the Talmud, that, from time to time, just open a book at random and see where your finger falls, because that may well be a message from the divine, right? From God, something that you need to hear at that point. So I let the book fall open at random after I pulled it off the shelf. And this is what I happened to turn to. It's from Rambam, that's Rabbi Maimonides, right? Moses Maimonides, the great philosopher and one of the great elucidators of all the Torah and all of our history. He was living and teaching and practicing medicine in southern Spain, and he actually ended up in Egypt when it became too hot for him in Spain, and I don't mean the weather. So the Rambam, in his introduction to the Mishnah, says, the loftiest thing that can be understood by the intellect is the perception in one's mind of the oneness of the Holy One, blessed is He, and all that is related to this in divine matters. The other branches of wisdom are meant only to accustom the mind through them to thinking about abstract matters to the point where one can come to have knowledge of the divine. To speak about this matter fully would take very long. What is the Rambam telling us? Now, this is not, a religious freak who turned his back on science and who says that the only thing that really is wisdom in the world is knowledge of God, because everything else is, beyond me. Rambam was an absolute genius in a later time, because he lived before the medieval times and before the Renaissance, but in centuries later, they would have referred to such a person as Maimonides as a Renaissance man. I mean, he was truly a gifted doctor, a gifted scientist, a gifted writer, and of course, a gifted rabbi and elucidator of the Torah. But as a doctor, I mean, he was extremely respected. He was the doctor to kings and queens. So when the Rambam tells you that the height of knowledge, that the height of wisdom is to come to understand the simplest of all prayers, which every Jew starts saying when he's a little child and he's hearing it from his parents in the cradle, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? And the ultimate wisdom, he tells us, is to come to understand a little bit of what that means, that God is one. It is the most difficult thing to perceive. It takes a philosopher and a scientist and everybody who's pursuing knowledge and wisdom a lifetime to grasp what the oneness of God is. But in that oneness, right, what we can begin to see now during this time of plague, one aspect of that oneness is the extreme connectivity of all God's creatures. And the illusion that we all live in our little fiefdoms and we don't really connect with other people except to read about them in the news or to see their trolling posts on social media, right? That's all an illusion. We're very connected to everyone on earth, and now we're seeing just how connected, right? And we have to social distance ourselves. Like it's an extreme act of isolation just to separate ourselves a little bit from the oneness of humanity, from the oneness of God's creatures. But in this time of isolation, we have a little bit of time to meditate and to learn and to try to grasp what the oneness of everyone is. I'm also reminded of a poem by John Donne, the English poet and teacher, for whom the bell tolls. If you're familiar with that poem, it begins, "No man is an island." And if someone out there dies, it is not, just some far off thing that doesn't really affect you. Every death of every human does affect you because no man is an island. And we, the human people, humanity is like a continent. And so even if a clod of earth gets washed into the sea, the continent is diminished. And therefore, send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. We are very mindful of everyone who has already been lost in this plague. It is a tremendous loss for all of us. And while we must maintain our sense of joy and gratitude that we're alive, that we're able to learn together, that we are able to advance a little bit in that quest for knowledge and wisdom, which ultimately leads to comprehending the oneness of the divine and therefore the oneness of all things. The fact that we can proceed a little bit, that we're together, that we're learning, that we can add to the wisdom in the world, that's a plus to the whole world at the same time that there's so many minuses. So let us pray, my friend, that we can keep learning together, keep adding to the oneness of the world. And while we're here, let us pray, please, God, end this plague quickly. And please send healing to everybody who is sick now. May they have a complete and speedy recovery. And we say, Amen. All right, let's get back to our daf. We are, as I said, Tractate Shabbos, page 26. We're in the second chapter, elaborating on the second Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who I just shared with you who he is and what he said. So Shimon ben Elazar says, we may not light the Shabbos lamp with sap from a balsam tree. Why? Two reasons are given. Two reasons are given. Number one, balsam is fragrant. You're familiar with balsam. It was actually one of the materials used to make the incense mixture that was burned in the temple every day, which is a very beautiful and pleasing aroma. That, by the way, was not what was intended. Right now, we're reading in our parsha, in our Torah portion of the week, last week and this week, about the sacrifices. And last week we read that they give a pleasing aroma to Hashem. But it's not the pleasing aroma of the incense. As Rashi says, it was a pleasing aroma because God told us to do it, and we did it, right? So any sacrifice that's brought up because we were told to do it, and we do it, that's a pleasing aroma. But the incense did contain balsam, and so balsam and the oil of the balsam tree is very fragrant. And because it's so fragrant, it should not be used in the Shabbos lamp. Why? It seems like, that would be like a perfect substance. It smells good, right? It's like it would be the original aromatherapy. But we don't use it because that oil is so fragrant that a person might come to remove a little bit of it to anoint themselves or to put it, somewhere where he'd like to have that smell. And if you remove any oil from the Shabbos lamp after Shabbos has begun, so then you've diminished the amount of oil in the Shabbos lamp, which would cause it to die early, right? Once the oil is used up, the Shabbos lamp is going to go out. If you remove oil from it, from what it was before Shabbat began, then you're causing it to be extinguished early, and you're performing the forbidden labor of extinguishing a flame on Shabbos. A second reason is given why we don't want to use balsam oil from the balsam tree in the Shabbos lamp, because it is highly flammable in an irregular way. It sputters. It can cause a flame to jump out. It evaporates quickly. It can settle on. Well, it's actually a double reason. One is that it can cause a fire because it's such an inflammable substance and an unpredictable substance, and also because the flame sort of carries with it bits of that oil and it settles on things, and you might think, oh man, I shouldn't have lit that. This is dangerous, or I shouldn't have lit that. The residue is getting on my furniture, so I'll put out the lamp. And again, you would perform the forbidden labor of extinguishing on Shabbos. And to elaborate on that danger, our sages bring down this story from a horror film. I didn't write down who said it. Yeah, the Gemara relates, so it's not told which sage brought it down. But it's a story right from a horror film that a mother-in-law who hated her daughter-in-law told her, oh, you know what you should do, honey? You should anoint yourself with oil from balsam oil, because you'll smell so nice, and then light the Shabbos candles. And the daughter-in-law did that, and she lit the Shabbos candles, and the flame jumped onto the oil that was on her body, and flames were everywhere, and she was killed in the resulting fire. I mean, it's just like, you guys remember Carrie, that movie from when we were kids? Terrible, horror show. But I think they share that story to bring home, you don't play with fire, candle lighting is a huge and important obligation, and you do it safely. You don't take any chances. What was it, about 10 years ago, there's a terrible story coming out of Brooklyn having to do with a blech, right? You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to turn the heat on and off. But a family was using a blech. It's like a thing that they use to cover the burners on the stove so that they can keep things warm on Shabbos. And somehow, I don't know, maybe the flame went out, and then there was gas leaking all over the place, and then there was a spark, or there was an exposed bulb. I don't remember what the exact circumstances were, but it was a horrific fire that killed most of the members of the family. So we must be very careful, right? Life above all. Having mentioned balsam oil, we learn in passing that at the time of the destruction of the first temple, when almost all the Jewish people were exiled out of Israel and into Babylonia, it was called the Babylonian exile, where most of them remained. There was a 70-year exile, and then a number of people went back, not everybody, right? And so that's actually on the Purim story, which takes place after people could have gone back to Israel but didn't. There is a commentary that may have been part of what was going on in the Purim story. But at any rate, at the beginning of that exile, when everybody was removed from Israel and taken into captivity, this is Babylonian captivity, a few people were allowed to remain in Israel. And who were they? Here they're defined in this passage as just the people that were necessary to work the land a little bit, not like every farmer who could keep a field. Just a few people were left, and among them are mentioned specifically the balsam collectors, so the people who are collecting oil from the balsam tree, and the snail trappers. So these are the people who were capturing the chilazon snail. That's the snail that was used to make the techelis, the sky blue dye that we use on our tzitzis, on our ritual fringes. So those are the only people that were allowed to remain in Israel during the Babylonian captivity. Also regarding balsam oil, Rabbi Yishmael says that like the balsam oil emerges from the tree itself, right? It's like sap. It's a sap that comes out of a tree. You can think like maple syrup, same idea. It comes right out of the tree itself. Rabbi Yishmael says we may not light with anything that emerges from the tree. Now, he's obviously not saying we can't light with anything that's from a tree, because olive oil is the prime thing that we would use to light the Shabbos flame and the Shabbos lamp. That obviously comes from the olive tree. So I'm assuming that what he means is nothing that emerges from the tree itself, right? From the trunk, from the bark. Rabbi Yishmael ben Baroka says that only with substances that emerge from the fruit of the tree, so like the olive oil. I'm wondering, does that include the nut and the seed of the tree? Because there is sesame oil, there is nut oil. That's just, I'm asking regarding the opinion of him, Rabbi Yishmael ben Baroka, because we've already learned that the sages permit us to use every oil in the Shabbos lamb, except for tar, because it has a foul odor. Balsam sap, which is not an oil, but you can make oil from it. But now we've just learned why we don't do that, and the halacha does follow that. But all other oils are permitted. Rabbi Tarfon is the one who said that olive oil is the premium oil to put in the Shabbos lamb. But then Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, objects to Rabbi Tarfon and says, what are you talking about? Olive oil is the only oil. What about the people in Babylonia? They use sesame oil, oil from the sesame seed. What about the people in Medea? They use nut oil. What about the people in Alexandria? They use radish oil. And so our sages have ruled, and this is the halacha, all oils are permitted in the Shabbos lamb unless they're specifically excluded for one of the reasons that we've already mentioned. Now we begin a complicated digression that's going to go on tomorrow. Shimon ben Elazar says that anything that emerges from a tree may be used as roofing for a sukkah unless it was fashioned into a vessel. Right? So the roofing of a sukkah, traditionally it's palm leaves, right? That's a sort of typical thing. Leaves from a palm tree, from a date palm, from some other kind of palm tree. And that's called schach, right? It's the material that we're going to use for the roofing of a sukkah. The roofing of a sukkah that where we live in it and eat in it during Sukkot. The roofing material is called schach. And what is qualified to be used as schach? It's anything that was once living but is now detached from the ground. It has to be plant matter and it has to be detached from the plant. It can't be still alive. You can't train a tree branches to cover your sukkah if those branches are still attached to the tree. But you could use branches, you could use, pine branches. As long as you cut them off the tree, they're ready to go. So now that we're talking about removing material from a tree, we enter this discussion about materials from a tree that are fashioned into garments, into clothing. And what are the rules about materials that are fashioned into garments with respect to tumah, ritual impurity, right? Because not every garment can receive impurity. There's going to be rules for what are the rules of receiving impurity. So we've talked about this a bunch of times. We can't explain the whole thing every time, but just ritual impurity is tumah, and something which is ritually pure is tahor, or the noun is tahara, right? So the rules of ritual purity. This is not talking about cleanliness. This is talking about, something that develops a source of impurity from itself, like if a man has a nighttime emission, or if a woman is in her menses, or that you contract it from something else, like a creeping thing. If you touch a cockroach, you can get tumah from that. Not because it's filthy, but simply because it's a creeping thing, right? Or if you touch a dead body, or if you touch a leper. And when we talk about lepers and leprosy, we're talking about the biblical condition called tsaras, which is not medical leprosy. It's a skin condition that arises from a spiritual condition, right? It was never exactly spelled out. Sages like to make a connection between tsaras and lashon hara, speaking evil tongue, speaking negatively about other people. But it was never spelled out that clearly. But you could develop this spiritual impediment that would manifest itself in a skin condition called tsaras. And a house could also get tsaras, and clothing could develop tsaras. So if we look at the inner dimension of these laws, a skin condition that breaks out when a person has a spiritual impediment, right? And it's not totally clear what your spiritual impediment is. It's not like, okay, well, you got tsaros, so clearly you were speaking Lashon Hara. You got tsaros, so clearly you must have stolen something. It's not that clear. But you're carrying around some kind of baggage. Now, it was a blessing when tsaros existed. It no longer exists. We don't have tsaros anymore. Right? When the second temple was destroyed and we entered the exile, there was no more tsaros. Right? So it was like, okay, well, that's beautiful, right? It's like we escaped that plague. We escaped the possibility of getting that skin disease. But it's not so beautiful because when the nation was at such a high spiritual level that if a person, had some kind of spiritual damage that would lead him to have tsaros, and then he would have a period of introspection and examining his deeds and going through a purification process so that he could rejoin the community. That was positive, right? That was a positive thing to engage in that process. And likewise, a house could develop tsaros and garment could develop tsaros. So if we think about that, all right, well, not at that level. We no longer live in a world where people, houses, and clothing can develop a physical evidence, a physical manifestation of a spiritual impediment. Nevertheless, spiritual impediments exist, right? And so it behooves us to seek opportunities to examine our deeds, right? To make introspection, to ask ourselves, am I living the way that I should be living? Am I treating people the way I should be treating them? I may not live in a time and place where the holiness is so high that if I make such mistakes, it's going to be physically apparent to me. That means all the more I have to dig in and examine my deeds because it's not going to be shown to me. I'm not going to be given that opportunity unless you happen to be alive in March of 2020 and along with the whole world experiencing a plague, right? What is this plague but an opportunity to go introspective, to examine our deeds as individuals, as communities, as nations, and to ask ourselves how we can do better. We're all being given this opportunity, an extended opportunity. Although utility workers, transit workers, law enforcement, and especially doctors and nurses, and everybody's still working so hard to keep us safe. Okay, they don't have so much time on their hands. But everyone who's locked down, let us take this opportunity and make it useful, right? And ask ourselves, how could we be doing better? To return, so Shimon ben Elazar is asking in this long discussion about things which come from a tree, things that are made from plant materials with regard to contracting tumah. Okay, so for tsaros, for this skin condition mentioned in the Torah, which is usually translated as leprosy, but it's not, right? It's a skin condition that is a physical manifestation of a spiritual impediment. The Torah mentions linen and wool with respect to garments that can contract tumah. So it singles out linen and wool. Wool, of course, comes from animals. It comes from sheep. Linen comes from plants. And so our sages here will single out linen as possessing, sort of special properties, right? That linen is a special kind of garment. And so different rules are going to apply to it than will apply to other garments, right? That are made from other materials. So whereas a garment, in order to be a garment and to be susceptible to contracting tumah, let's say a person touched a dead body, right? Now that person has tumah. If that person touches me, I'm going to have tumah also. If that person touches my garment, does that garment contract tumah? Maybe. If it's made out of linen or wool, yes. If it's made out of some other substance, it's going to have to be large enough. It's going to have a minimum measure. In some cases, just 3 by 3 finger breadths. In other cases, 3 by 3 hand breadths. But linen is being singled out as a special substance, right? In terms of making garments out of it. Right, right? And it's only wool and linen garments that are going to contract tumah from something else. Tumah can arise in a garment. I mean, tsaris can arise in a garment. Tumah can only be caught from something else. Tsaris can only arise in a garment, right? You're not going to catch tsaris from somewhere else because it's not a contagious disease. It's a physical manifestation of a spiritual impediment. If it's something that you just catch, tsaris now we're talking about, then it's not tsaris. But tumah is something that we can spread from person to person, right? And it is completely invisible. It's even, smaller than, its unit is even smaller than a virus. It's even smaller than an atom, right? Tumah is something that it's spiritually spread, right? It's a spiritual impurity. And that is why, and this is the last thing we'll mention on this page, if you're talking about tumah of a tent, right? So this means, and this is mentioned specifically in the Torah, that a person dies, okay? So let's just say they die in bed, on their deathbed, after a long life. God willing, that's the best way to go. Live a long life, you know it's coming, you die on your deathbed, you've had a chance to make your peace, and your relatives are around you as you go, and then you'll be welcomed in the next world by the relatives who've gone ahead of you. That's what it means to be gathered unto your people. But at the moment that you pass from this world, everyone who's in the room with you will contract corpse tumah, just because they're under the same roof. Okay, they're in the same tent with you, or they're under the same roof with you. So everything in that room is going to need purification. Now, we don't have these purification processes anymore. We don't really, it's not, as a practical matter, we don't deal with tumah. Tumah was something that, we learn about, and we'll learn a lot about in our journey through the Talmud, but it's not something that we immerse in a mikvah to purify ourselves of tumah, because where it really mattered was so that you could eat, pure things, and you could bring offerings in purity to the temple. Once there was no temple, the practical ramifications of tumah pretty much were all wiped out. But the learning, of course, goes on, and that's how this whole body of practice, which existed at the time of the temple, is now continued. It's in our learning. But here's the point. If a tent is made out of, plastic, right, or if it's made out of cotton, but neither linen nor wool, so then everything under it, with the dead body in that tent, everything inside will contract tumah. But the tent itself will not, unless that tent is made out of either wool or linen. If it's made out of wool or linen, then the tent itself will contract the tumah as well. Tomorrow we'll continue this understanding of what are the minimum requirements for a piece of cloth to be considered a garment so that it can contract tumah. What are the implications of a garment contracting tumah? Who's affected and why? And we're getting off the subject of with what may we light, the Shabbos lamp, but ultimately we'll work our way back because we're going to ask about a linen garment. Can it be used as a wick, right? And that's how we're going to work our way back to Shabbos. All right, let me extend my arm here and check if there are comments or questions that I should take a look at. Not seeing that. What is that? Gabriel Shaltiel. One thing no one ever talks about is that people are spreading this disease in currency, coins and paper money. Oy vey. Oy vey. Okay, so look, regarding spreading the virus, folks, we got to do everything we can to slow that down. Pikuach nefesh, life above all things. Right? When I talk to you about the fact that it is my firm belief, that this plague was sent to us by the Holy One for a reason. I'm not going to speculate on who's being punished and why. Okay, everyone can come up with their own list of what is wrong with this world that an objective, divine creator looking down on his children would look down and see what's wrong with this world. We all have opinions on what's wrong, who's wrong, etc. But the fact that there are things wrong in this world, I think we can all agree on. Okay, and in terms of what needs to change in this world, so we start with ourselves. Right? If we're not capable of changing and improving ourselves, then we should shut up with regard to what other people should do to change their world and themselves and their institutions and their company and their government, etc. If we're unable to make our own change in ourselves, then the criticism is totally misplaced. So this is a time for real introspection, real examination of deeds, just asking the question, okay, I am a soul, right? We don't have souls, we are souls. I am a soul. I was sent into this world for a reason. There is a mission that my soul was given, that I was given when I came into this world. That mission is what I can uniquely accomplish, something that nobody else can do. A lot of us have a sense of what it is that we were sent here to do. If we don't know what we were sent here to do, then the thing to do right now is to say, what was I sent here to do? And you can start eliminating what you know you weren't sent here to do. And as soon as you start to have an inkling of what you were sent here to do, then you ask yourself, am I doing it? Could I be doing more? Could I be doing better? Are there people who need me? Can I be more helpful? I mean, like, you gotta ask these questions. And right now, like, social media is on fire with people criticizing other people and saying how wrong they are to behave the way that they're behaving, how wrong they are to espouse whatever policy they're espousing. Wrong. But all these people who are criticizing everyone else, are they examining themselves and asking what they could be doing other than just trolling on social media, right? There's a lot to do personally. And if we don't come out from this period with our priorities in better order, with our commitments in better order, with our relationships in better order, so then it would be an opportunity missed. And I fear what will happen if the whole world misses its opportunity to do better. Because I think that as plagues go, this one is actually pretty gentle, could be worse. Let us learn our lessons from this plague now. I'm sending you all big love from LA. May we stay healthy, may we stay safe, may we hunker down with wisdom, and may we grow in wisdom while we are hunkered down.